I'm Emily Chang, and welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Lyft's IPO roadshow kicked off this week as the ride-hailer gears up for what could be the biggest U.S. public debut so far this year. We'll discuss the prospects with some early investors. Plus, U.S. state officials are in the early stages of a probe into Google focused on antitrust and privacy in the largest coordinated effort to take on big tech since the 1990s. We will hear from Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. And the U.S. Digital Service was born in the wake of the bumpy rollout of healthcare.gov. Now it's stepping up efforts to give Americans better access to government services. First, to our top story, Lyft is pitching itself as a fierce challenger to Uber. And investors are taking a close look at America's second largest ride-hailing company ahead of its $2.1 billion public debut next week. But can the startup win them over? We took a closer look.
2019, the year that so many highly anticipated tech companies plan to go public. Among them, two stand out. A race best described as focus versus frenzy. Frenzy being Uber. Engaging in rapid global expansion and retreat, food delivery, bike sharing, self-driving cars, and flying taxis. Plus a valuation that bankers say could soar to $120 billion. Lyft, on the other hand, may best be described as focus. Launched in 2009, Lyft grew out of co-founders Logan Green and John Zimmer's 2007 startup, Zimride, which connected college students looking for rides, and has focused almost solely on growth in the United States, going from less than a dozen cities in 2009 to 95% of the country in 2019. Lyft now claims it controls 39% of the U.S. ride-hailing market. And it's just starting to go international, launching in Toronto and Ottawa City in 2018. It's keeping up with its top rival by getting in on scooters and bike sharing, buying Motivate that runs City Bike in New York. And yes, it's also working on self-driving cars, buying London-based Blue Vision Labs, beefing up staff working on autonomous technology to over 300 people. Lyft's already courted a slew of major investors like Japan's Rakuten and Andreessen Horowitz. But as it prepares to go public, it's trying to lure more, hoping to impress by doubling its ride count from 500 million in 2017 to 1 billion in less than 1 year. Revenue jumped up 541% to $2.2 billion last year from just $343 million in 2016, with an estimated valuation of $20 to $25 billion. Despite losses increasing 32% to $991 million in 2018. And while Lyft was second out of the gate to launch, it's first in line to go public, weeks or months ahead of Uber. In an increasingly volatile tech market, the hope is investors will hail Lyft's ride.
This week, we also caught up with Anne Miura Ko, an early investor and Lyft board member, along with her colleague Mike Maples, both partners at the early-stage venture capital firm Floodgate.
On the very first pitch that they came in with, it's a pitch that I still have, and I like showing it to Stanford students. But they talked a lot about why transportation was so critical to the fabric of the United States. And they started off with canals, and they went to railways, and then they showed highways, and how actually the physical landscape of the country changed and the economy changed as a result. And the question that John and Logan posed that I thought was really fascinating was, what's that next transportation revolution? And do you want to be a part of it? And my answer to that, and Mike's answer to that time was absolutely yes. There was nothing else in the market that was a transportation revolution.
Uber already existed at this point, though, right?
No, it did not exist at the time that we invested. So it was still.
And I think it was a black car service at the time, so it wasn't about ride sharing.
Yeah, so when Uber first launched, actually, it was Uber Taxi, and then they became Uber Black. Mm-hmm. And so even when they launched, there was still a pocket of time where the only comp that we actually could find in the market was Zipcar. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we were comparing it against. And sort of, is that the market? Is there something bigger than that?
So, Mike, what did you see?
Well, when you invest as crazy too early as we do, you have to have an opinion about where things are going. And so we'd been early in the sharing economy with Chegg and TaskRabbit, companies like that. And we had this idea that the internet lets you locate something that's unused, and the smartphone would let you locate something that's unused and moving. And so we were just looking for network transportation. And when Logan and John walk in the room and describe their vision for how things could be, we're like, okay, those are our guys.
Still, this is a company that's losing almost half as much money as it is making. I mean, they brought in $2 billion in revenue last year. They lost $900 million in revenue. How do you justify that to public market investors who are going to buy in now?
So I think this is really about the long game. And so we always return as early stage investors to the origin story and why 9 years ago we were complete buyers and why we are still buyers of what the vision is. And I think the really unique nature of this business is that this transportation revolution still hasn't played itself out. There's so much more to be done. There's so much more to go. So if you think about the potential of network transportation, as Mike talks about it, the ability for people to not just share the ride, but actually figure out all the different ways in which they can get from point A to point B, whether that includes an autonomous vehicle or not. There's so many new ways in which we're going to be adding and thinking about transportation that is going to actually start to change where people live and how they make choices about where they go. And so we've just scratched the surface of what's possible here, and that's my excitement about the future.
Now, look, it's not unusual for a tech company to go public and still not be making money, but Lyft is saying they may never make money. They say in their risk factors, we may never be profitable. You know, why should investors buy into that, given the extreme nature of this particular case?
Well, I don't really want to speak for Lyft or their numbers too much, especially in a quiet period. But
please do.
Yeah, the way I look at some markets, the product is so compelling and the value proposition is so compelling, it will be satisfied. And ride sharing was just one of these ideas where I don't know if you remember the first time you ever took a Lyft. But like, you just knew instantly it was going to be a huge success and that people throughout the world would be energized to want to get to places this way. And when the market will be satisfied, sometimes the best way to create value is to move very quickly. And so our belief is that transportation is being reinvented and that it's a race to be the category king. And so in the early days, value gets created by gaining market share, by satisfying the demand. That's not always the right strategy, but I think in this case, the companies that have been aggressive and moved quickly have won over the ones that didn't.
So I agree, it is something that users want. It is something that I want. I've used Lyft several times. That said, what is the value of it? What is to say? Who's to say this isn't the next Snap, where you go public at a big valuation and then a year later it's worth a third of what it was?
And again, so in the quiet period, there's very little that I can actually say about the company specifically and the financials specifically. But I kind of return to that notion of when you look at the original pitch deck that John and Logan pitched, you look at the founder's manifesto, and then actually the founder's letter. There's this incredible consistency to why they've built this business. And oftentimes, Mike and I are looking at a company, and we're investing in businesses that we believe will be here not just 10 years from now, but 25, 50 years. And we call these thunder lizards, we call them legendary businesses, whatever you want to call them, right? We want to see companies that have this incredible length in terms of the story that they have. And one of the things that we've seen consistently is that these companies that have that characteristic have this storyline to them that's consistent from not only day one, but it goes throughout the length of the story of the business. And when you compare these three documents that I've seen, there's this incredible story of why this company needs to exist and why we believe that investing into these founders, 9 years ago was a good idea. That story is so consistent, and that creates an authenticity that we absolutely love in founders that we invest.
That was Ann Miraco and Mike Maples from Floodgate. Coming up, U.S. Attorneys General are looking closely at whether Google presents an antitrust case. Our interview with the top lawyer for Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Last September, then U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions called a meeting of state attorneys general to discuss whether Google and Facebook were suppressing conservative views. Now we know that a smaller group of those state officials have begun looking into possible antitrust or consumer protection violations by Google. And this comes at a time when presidential hopefuls like Senator Elizabeth Warren are calling for a breakup of big tech firms. A rallying cry that's even reached across the aisle, with Texas Senator Ted Cruz retweeting Senator Warren's criticisms of Facebook, saying, "First time I've ever retweeted Elizabeth Warren, but she's right. Big tech has way too much power to silence free speech." To discuss, I spoke with Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on Monday.
We have serious concerns about both of those issues that you've talked about, both antitrust, just the power and the wealth of these companies. We have a history in this country of looking at those issues and breaking up companies that are too big. And then we also have concerns about privacy, the lack of transparency in how they collect this information, the lack of transparency of how they use this information. Consumers are not being paid for this. And there are also vulnerable populations like children who are getting their data gathered, and we have no protections there for them.
So Google did release a statement in response to this probe, if you will, or early stages of a probe into Google, saying privacy and security are built into all of our products, and we will continue to engage constructively with state attorneys general on policy issues. What kind of action, given all of your concerns, do you think needs to be taken against Google?
Well, I think we just need to get more information from them. A lot of the questions are answered with very general answers about analytics, and so there's not a lot of clarity for state attorney generals to understand exactly what they're doing with this data, what they're doing with our data. I've heard that, Google has literally, thousands and thousands of data points on every consumer that uses them and knows more about you than you do. So it is a little concerning that most consumers are not aware of the just massive data that these companies have, and then how they're using it and selling it, and obviously the consumer is not getting any of that money.
Now, I'm sure you're very well aware of Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal to break up big tech at this point. Here's what she had to say at South by Southwest about a week and a half ago about her proposal.
That opportunity to do what you do best, to come up with a great idea, to work your heart out to make it happen, to be able to compete on a level playing field, is taken away by these platform giants. So my view is break those things apart, and we will have a much more competitive, robust market in America.
You've got Republicans on your side of the aisle, like Ted Cruz, agreeing with her, at least in principle. Do you think big tech needs to be broken up?
Look, I'm not sure yet, but I certainly have concerns. I've talked to a lot of their competitors who are being pushed out of the marketplace, and they have no choice in how they respond because there's such control by a company like Google that controls about 89% of the searches. And so it does put these companies, smaller companies, these startups either get purchased or they get pushed out of the marketplace. And so there are concerns about competitiveness and companies be able to start up and compete.
Now, Republicans generally resist the government getting too involved in the private marketplace. What makes this time different, or this situation different?
So, we're definitely tend to be free market. We want lots of competition. That's the key word, competition. But when you have companies that dominate the marketplace becoming almost monopolistic, well, then competition goes away, and then you have this argument that consumers may be harmed. And obviously, the European Union has already fined Google, billions of dollars in two different cases. And so there are concerns about just the competitiveness and the opportunity to go create products that Google doesn't push out of the marketplace.
How do you feel, given your concerns about data? How do you feel about Facebook specifically? And would you be interested in taking on, a similar exploration of whether Facebook deserves some of this scrutiny as well?
Certainly, we are looking at the companies like Facebook and Google. It's not just limited to those two companies. It's any of these giant companies that are dominating the marketplace and potentially harming consumers and causing consumers to be in a position where all of this data is controlled by one company or two companies or three companies, and the consumer doesn't have access to it, they don't get paid for it, and they don't know how it's being used.
Do you think consumers should get paid for their data?
Hey, look, I think that should be looked at. I mean, this is incredibly valuable information when you know so much about every consumer, and you're selling that data, and the consumer doesn't even know. There ought to at least be some greater transparency involved so the consumer realizes what they're turning over to these companies.
So if you're looking at Google and Facebook and, as you say, other big tech companies, is it fair to say you're also looking at Amazon and Apple and Microsoft?
Look, we're just beginning this. We don't necessarily have specific companies that we've targeted, but we are looking at a broad range of companies that control a lot of the marketplace and trying to determine, are they involved in viewpoint discrimination? Are they protecting consumer data? How do we get more transparency in the process so consumers are treated fairly and their information is protected? Because we don't know how much these companies are protecting consumer data and who they're selling it to.
Now, last year, we reported that this exploration of Google came out of this meeting with then Attorney General Jeff Sessions out of a concern that these tech companies were suppressing conservative views. Were you at that meeting with then Attorney General Sessions?
No, I couldn't attend. I had other people in my office at that meeting. We are concerned about this. I mean, we had this just happen this week in our Texas Senate. The Texas Senate caucus put up a Facebook post about a born alive bill to protect children that are born alive from being aborted after they're alive, and that content was taken down by Facebook. They were arguing that was engagement bait, and then they also took down another Facebook post by an individual senator that talked about that issue. I don't know what engagement bait is. I thought engagement is what they wanted. I thought free speech was what they wanted, but that is certainly an issue that is coming up more and more often.
That was Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Coming up, social media platforms like Facebook rely heavily on algorithms to stop the spread of extremist content. But as we saw in the New Zealand mosque shooting, that doesn't always work. We dig into why next. This is Bloomberg.
Today, as we sit here, 99% of the ISIS and al-Qaeda content that we take down on Facebook, our AI systems flag before any human sees it. So that's a success in terms of rolling out AI tools that can proactively police and enforce safety across the community.
That is what Mark Zuckerberg told the Senate Judiciary Committee back in April of last year. And this is what Facebook's newsroom posted the day after the New Zealand mosque shootings that killed 50 people. In the first 24 hours, we removed 1.5 million videos of the attack globally, of which over 1.2 million were blocked at upload. So just how does that video keep getting uploaded after such an attack? On Monday, we talked to Kartik Hosanagar, professor of technology and digital business at the Wharton School. He is also the author of a new book called A Human's Guide to Machine Learning, a look at how algorithms are shaping lives today. Also joining us, Bloomberg Tech's global executive editor, Tom Giles.
We knew it was bad. We knew it was bad not just on Facebook, but also on YouTube and other platforms in social media on the internet. We know it's bad when this many people can see such violent, gruesome imagery, and when these companies struggle to use the tools that they have at their disposal to pull it down. It's a terrible thing. That's a lot of views, and as we saw over the weekend, those things are getting politicized by other parties as well, as we saw with Erdogan.
Professor Hosanagar, we know that it took 17 long minutes for the video to be caught and taken down in the first place, but then why so many hundreds of thousands of times does it still make it through the algorithm when clearly Facebook doesn't want this on its platform?
Well, it's pretty clear Facebook does not want it on its platform. They've taken a number of steps over the years, but we have to recognize that live videos are particularly problematic and thorny for these algorithms. So most of these firms, including Facebook, they have a three-pronged approach to catch these kinds of content. First, they've created a large database of non-offensive or extremist content. So anytime a video is uploaded, they compare it against that. But live videos, by definition, don't look like a video that they've seen before.
So why have live video at all? I mean, it's clearly dangerous. There have been murders and suicides on Facebook's live platform before.
Well, that's for their business, the new area of growth that they've been kind of looking at. And it has a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities where people are at a music concert, they can stream what's happening there. I could potentially be streaming to my friends, hey, I'm on Bloomberg. And so that's appealing to Facebook. But the catch is that they have a bunch of machine learning algorithms that look at this content and they predict the likelihood that the content is offensive, but it's not an exact science, because you have a video of somebody shooting that could be a terror-related content, or it could be somebody at a shooting range, it could be somebody uploading a video game, so it gets to be a bit problematic, and live video in particular is very hard.
So now, Tom, Facebook and YouTube know that this is a problem. Is there any way to put the genie back in the bottle, or the monster back in its cage, now that this is a feature on the site? Or do you disable it, or do you delay live video?
Right, that's a question that has come up, is do you delay, like on broadcast television, for example, you don't see the terrible things that happen, you know, the wardrobe malfunctions, what have you, because there is this delay, or it's, in theory, that's the way it's supposed to be. Now, practically speaking, when you have millions of people at any given moment putting live video out there, I don't see, and maybe you could explain, how you can physically actually delay live video. Does it even become live video in that instance?
Well, yeah, you call it live in quotes, but you delay it a little bit. And that helps to some extent. But in the end, you know, no algorithm will have 100% accuracy. So you do rely on human beings. So all these companies have human moderators. They also rely on users flagging offensive content. The human beings take action, but that takes a few minutes, a few hours sometimes. And so one has to, in some ways, deal with this. The real question is not why did a video get through, and I think it's unavoidable with live content. The question for me is, what exactly are these firms doing to police the content? Can they be more transparent? Are there independent audits done? And that's something we're starting to see some initial steps, but really they could take that far.
So that's a question of values. The point was made over the weekend that these platforms have actually done a lot to take down terrorist, ISIS-related content. But not nearly the same efforts have been taken to eliminate white supremacy, for example, on these platforms. You know, often you'll hear, well, this is free speech, or this doesn't quite cross the line. What about this bigger problem that white supremacy and hate online can often feed some of these violent acts?
Yeah, it's, I think, a tough line between what is free speech and what is clearly promoting hate on the platform and needs to go away. For every decision they'll be taking, there'll be somebody on the other side, but they have to take an aggressive action. They have to view themselves as media companies that have to take on the responsibility of curating. I think they cannot hide behind, we're a platform, we're just letting users share what they want, because I think users do want some policing. So we do want them to take a stand.
Kartik Hosanagar there, author of A Human's Guide to Machine Learning, and our own Tom Giles. Coming up, Europe slams Google with another fine totaling $1.7 billion. Its third and possibly final EU penalty. But regulators are still scrutinizing other tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. On Wednesday, Google was fined $1.7 billion by the European Union in its latest antitrust judgment. It is the last of a trio of probes that have already racked up $9.3 billion in penalties for Google. The search giant is making changes to how it displays ads to comply with a 2017 order. Competition chief Margaret Vestager hinted at less risk of new fines in the future.
When I cite the numbers that we have now and the intentions of Google in the Android decision, this is also to say, well, we don't have a non-compliant issue as it is now. We will, of course, keep following this market, but I think it is positive that Google takes steps that allows for more consumer choice.
Richard Stables, CEO at Kelku, a shopping search engine which operates in 22 countries and competes with Google in Europe, and Bloomberg's Garrett DeVink, who covers Google, joined us to discuss.
We have a third and, again, quite a large fine. However, when it comes to Google's balance sheet, I mean, this is pretty baked in. Investors are not really concerned about even these fines that seem to cost a ton of money. And as you said there, this looks like that the heat on Google from Europe after a 10 years of what Google euphemistically called discussions with the EU looks to be closing for them. I don't think that it means that, they'll never be looked at again by European competition authorities, but there are also bigger fish to fry: Amazon, Apple, Facebook. Really what the last 10 years has shown is that, European regulators can go after these big tech companies. They can extract large fines. They can get support for it politically back at home without, getting major pushback from consumers in Europe.
Now, Richard, you've applauded the EU's decision here. What does Google changing its practices in this particular area mean for your business?
Well, thank you for having me. What I would say is that this fine today is something that we've welcomed and consumers have welcomed, but it's not going to change an awful lot in the marketplace. Google have been given basically a cease and desist order, which basically says stop doing what you've been doing, and they stopped doing it in 2016. But in these two-sided markets, basically the market is tipped in Google's favor. And they're going to come out of this and they're going to go, well, we just paid a tax for basically taking over another market. We asked for the commissioner to go further and to force Google to put right the wrongs that it had done to this market, just like it had done in shopping and in Android.
What would putting right the wrongs mean? I mean, to your point, Google controlled 70% of this particular ad market from 2006 to 2016.
Well, what it would mean is effectively market share. You have to look at this and say, Google has all the data, has it's got all the market. People look at it and say, why can't you compete? Well, we can't compete because they've got this entrenchment with the publishers. And the only way that can happen is if Google was forced to give up some market share, which it looks like the commissioner is unwilling or unable to do.
Garrett, what has Google's response to this been? I know that they have pointed to, this being just a few complaints, as they say it.
Yeah, I mean, Google's response, as it is in these situations, is that they won because they, in their opinion, have the best business, that they have the best algorithms to provide these kind of ads and products to the people who pay for them. But it's true. I mean, when they were in control of 70% of the market, that also gives them that power to continue and grab more and more of it. And it's difficult to see exactly how that would be changed. I think at this point, Google and its investors are pretty confident that they are not going to, be kicked out completely out of these markets. The fines, they're willing to pay them, and they'll continue doing their business as they have.
So, Richard, if Google has owned 70% of this particular ad market, with these changes, how does that percentage or market share change?
I don't think it changes very much at all. I think they'll continue in this market to control it and have at least 70%. Nothing's really changed in their behavior since 2016 when they removed these exclusivity clauses. I think you have to look at the broader context, though, and say, this is a company that's lost its moral compass. This is the third time it's been found guilty of anti-competition. This very, very big fine today, along with the other big fines. But from Google's perspective, it's just a tax to take over more markets.
Richard Stables, CEO at Kelku, and our own Garrett DeVink. Meantime, Google is betting big on gaming. The tech giant unveiled its new Stadia game streaming at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco this week. Stadia will let players access high-end games through the web without buying expensive consoles or personal computers. It's already being nicknamed the Netflix of gaming. Google also introduced its own game controller for console-like gaming on a computer or a smartphone. I spoke with Google Vice President Phil Harrison Tuesday, right after the announcement.
We see it as the new generation of game platforms that combine the world of watching games and playing games into one seamless experience. This has been purpose-built for the 21st century, powered by the amazing technology that only Google can bring to bear.
But can only Google bring certain kinds of content? Will this have exclusive content?
Yes, we announced today the formation of Stadia Games and Entertainment, which is Google's first-party games development studio, and we are working with developers to create games exclusively for Stadia all around the world right now. We've already shipped hundreds of development tools to leading studios, and they're hard at work creating games for the platform.
Will you also be licensing content? Gaming content is a lot more expensive than sort of typical streaming video content.
We partner with game publishers and game developers, big and small. You saw in our presentation today some of the leading lights of the games industry from Ubisoft and Take-Two, all bringing their amazing experiences to our platform. But also it's about bringing YouTube creators into the mix, where a YouTube creator who has millions of subscribers can bring their fans into the game and allows game developers to connect with more and more people seamlessly across all the screens in their life.
Now, if this is successful, it could mean a huge shift in the gaming market. But how will you make sure that the experience is consistent across devices, given the differences in bandwidth, when it comes to everyone's internet experience?
Well, that's the magic of Google technology that runs in our data center that allows us to utilize our advances and investments in codecs and streaming technologies, both at the hardware, software, and service level. And that allows us to take the developer's original vision and stream it to the user's home, to the gamer's home, and allows us to stream up to 4K 60 frames per second with all the latest, greatest visual and audio capabilities and technologies that gamers are used to, but without the need for a dedicated box, console, or PC.
Coming up, from Google to the White House, we talked to the U.S. Digital Service Administrator about how his career in tech helped prepare him for his time in Washington. And later, checking out on Instagram, shoppers will now be able to buy what they like right from the app. Could it be the next big revenue driver for Facebook? This is Bloomberg. In the heart of Washington, a nonpartisan tech group has been working to bring government services to Americans online. The U.S. Digital Service, known as USDS, has helped speed up veterans' disability claims and break down technical barriers for immigrants looking for green cards. We caught up with Matt Cutts, the administrator at USDS, and started by talking about the long and bumpy history of government technology services like healthcare.gov and the importance of clean rollouts going forward.
I think it's crucial. You don't always see in government people bringing what we call user-centered design. It's really thinking about the veteran, the doctor, the student, and how to put them at the center of the issue. And a lot of the times, if you just write the specifications and build software for a few years and don't actually talk to users, you don't end up with a good consumer experience.
Now, you worked at Google for many, many years where things move at light speed.
Yes.
Why move to government where things historically move very slowly?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First is just the mission and the impact. I mean, the meaningfulness of the ability to be able to see the impact that you can have is really deeply gratifying. The other thing is technology, you can cherry pick. You can just choose to serve one particular market. Government needs to serve everybody. And that really means that, whenever you talk to somebody over a Thanksgiving dinner table, they are able to see, okay, this is the impact that it has on my life.
Has it been a bit of a culture shock for you, though?
Yes. We like to joke that the U.S. Digital Service is like a bridge in between the worlds of technology and government, and the two worlds don't always speak well together, so you can come into a safe spot and learn a little bit about how to speak the other language.
Now, you worked under the Obama administration, you're now working under the Trump administration. You don't set policy, but you execute. What has it been like working for two very different presidents?
What's really gratifying is the fact that we care about implementing systems so that government systems that millions of people use work really well. And we've had support in both administrations. It's not a partisan issue to say technology in some cases is broken, and a system, whether it's a veteran getting her benefits or a student trying to figure out whether to go to a college, for them to get the information that they need and for that service to work well. So we've actually gotten great support, and we're gratified that we're able to make good progress.
Now, the president is once again taking on Google, Facebook, Twitter, accusing them of bias. Is that fair?
It's an interesting question. In my mind, I'm like levels down, where I'm just worried about, if you have a particular doctor who wants to submit a payment for Medicare, does that system really work? I think it's really fun to talk about, after hours in conversation and that sort of thing. But I think in the same way that DC doesn't always understand Silicon Valley doesn't always understand DC. And the more cross-pollination we have, probably the better for everybody.
What does Silicon Valley need to understand better? In the era of techlash, I mean, there's been so much backlash against these companies.
There has been. I was at South by Southwest, and I sat down eating a hot dog at a table, and somebody pitched me on a startup that does augmented reality dance lessons. And I think Silicon Valley can do a little more thinking about the sorts of services that everybody needs, not just a select few.
We saw many of the Democratic presidential candidates gather there, and they are taking on big tech. We're also seeing state attorneys general in the early stages of exploring whether Google in particular presents an antitrust case. Do you think Google presents an antitrust case?
So as someone who serves in the government, I don't want to take a position on that sort of thing. But from the time that I worked in government, there were a lot of very earnest people just working to make sure that the best quality of search results showed up. For me, it's a question of, there's the Federal Trade Commission, there's the Department of Justice. People need to look at consumer harm and consumer good, and that's, a question that people can look at.
How about a broader question? Senator Elizabeth Warren saying big tech needs to be broken up. Amy Klobuchar saying she wants an investigation. Do you think big tech more broadly needs to be broken up?
For me personally, it's not a matter of breaking up so much as big companies should realize that they are probably going to be scrutinized. And I think most companies realize that and are starting to accept the fact that no matter what, they are going to have to think about their impact, not just amongst their consumers and their markets, but throughout the entire country and the world.
You handle some of the most sensitive data about American citizens, medical records, for example. Google and Facebook have a lot of sensitive data about us. Is it clear at this point that we can't trust them with our data?
So one thing that's kind of interesting is that if a tech company or any company loses the trust of its consumers, I think that people will start to leave it. They have the choice to take their data out or to stop using Facebook or whatever the company is. The part that interests me on a day-to-day basis is if you think about the U.S. government, what is the trust in the U.S. government and how can we make that work a little better? There was a poll that just came out where for the first time the U.S. government was listed as if it were a company, and of the top 100 companies, it was dead last. And so there's a lot of ways that technology can make government work better for everyday people.
And yet we're continuing to see areas where technology is failing. I mean, there was just this mass murder in New Zealand, live video of it going up on Facebook and then getting reposted hundreds of thousands of times. Is that an example? In this case, they were almost powerless to stop their own power. So what can be done about that?
That's an interesting case because there is the notion of something that you don't want to show up, like spam. I used to work on spam on Google search results. And then there's also the notion of real-time things that you don't want to show up. So this idea of something going viral and people live streaming, really terrible stuff, I suspect the tech companies just haven't had the time to adjust to that specific model. I would not be surprised if there's engineers throughout Silicon Valley thinking about how can they adjust so that that sort of thing doesn't happen as easily in the future.
Meantime, we're seeing tech companies increasingly work with the government, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and this has caused, especially in Google's case, employee protests around Google's work with the Pentagon, such that Google actually ended a contract to help the government interpret aerial drone footage using Google AI. Is that a mistake?
I think reasonable people can have different viewpoints. I was talking to Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, recently. He came to visit one of our staff meetings, and we got to ask him questions. And he had a really interesting position that said Microsoft is basically a platform, and the platform should allow all kinds of customers and clients to come in, and you can't anticipate all the different ways that somebody's going to use a platform. It is definitely the case that people are going to be grappling with these issues, for quite some time to come.
Coming up, if you like what you see on Instagram, now you have the option to buy it. We have the details on the social network's new e-commerce strategy next. This is Bloomberg. After years of posting beautiful images of food, fashion, and design on Instagram, users will now be able to buy items they see and like directly through the app. This week, Instagram started testing a shopping feature called Checkout with a handful of retailers, including Nike and Revolve. Shoppers will be able to pay with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and PayPal. And PayPal Chief Operating Officer Bill Reddy talked about the rollout along with Bloomberg's tech Sarah Fryer with us.
So basically, in the Instagram app, you will be able to check out and purchase a product, which is unlike what we've seen before. Previously, they would redirect you to a retailer's website or app where you could complete your purchase. But what this does for Instagram is it gives them another line of revenue beyond advertising, which is going to be extremely significant to their business over the long term.
You wonder just how significant, Bill. How much business and traffic do you think this will drive for PayPal?
Well, this is building on a phenomenon we've seen for a long time of small businesses and other retailers having many new forums in which they're meeting buyers. And we think checkout on Instagram is a really great new experience. And Instagram itself has been a great forum for sellers to meet buyers. And as Sarah was just commenting on, this has been building for a long time in terms of buyers connecting with brands or with sellers there and then linking off to that seller's site. Now they'll complete the purchase right in context on Instagram. We think can help more of this activity happening, but this is something we hear from sellers all the time, that's a very important forum for them. And so we think this is quite an interesting new place for sellers to meet more buyers. So
it's interesting, but how big do you think it can be for you?
Well, if you look at our marketplace and partner business, separate from eBay, who continues to be a partner that we've worked with for a long time, but our top 20 marketplaces that we work with are already $85 billion in volume for us last year alone, and growing at 41% year on year. So that is a very large segment of our business, growing quite rapidly. And so our aspiration is that we want to connect our 30 million plus sellers to all the very best places for them to sell. And I think this is one of the important trends in commerce, is that a decade ago, there was one place or a couple places that a seller could go, particularly a smaller seller could go to sell online. Now there's this explosion of new forums that they can go sell, and we want to help connect sellers to all the best places where they can meet buyers. And we think Instagram is quite important in that. And so we're quite excited about Instagram enabling native checkout right inside the Instagram, inside of the stories there. And we're quite excited to be powering some of those capabilities, particularly buyer transactions, as well as the seller side of those transactions as well, and partnering with them to help enable those experiences.
So, Sarah, Facebook's going through a lot of changes. We just talked about some changes to ad targeting around housing and credit ads. Mark Zuckerberg has said the company is going to shift towards more private communications. Lots of questions how that will impact the ad business. How much revenue do you think this will drive, Instagram commerce will drive for the Facebook company?
It's hard to say because it's so early, but what I think is really important to keep in mind is that Facebook's legacy business, the news feed and the advertising that runs in the news feed, is not going to grow much more from here. It's already so saturated in all these big advertising markets around the world. So the company has really been investing in figuring out what their next business models are. And e-commerce is something that executives mentioned on the earnings call as like a very big priority for them for the future, alongside things happening in messaging, which may be harder to monetize. So I think that this is one of the few bright spots they have that is maybe more proven than some of the other things they're trying, like cryptocurrency and encrypted messaging.
So let's talk about the less bright spots. And Bill, Facebook, Instagram are both getting plagued by, hate, misinformation. And you look at many, many Instagram comments. This is a problem on Instagram. Does that concern you about being associated with that?
Well, we've partnered with Facebook across multiple forums for some time. We have a growing partnership there, and one of the things that we enable is fraud tools, things that enable marketplace and partner operators to go make sure that they're getting buyers that are legitimate buyers, and they're getting sellers that are legitimate sellers. This is something that across all the different forums we enable, we provide buyer and seller protection in those different forums. So separate from how we engage here, across the way we engage with our consumers and merchants, we help consumers shop without sharing sensitive financial information. We help merchants connect to more of these forums. And so, certainly there's a number of things that are being addressed across some of these places, but can this be a great forum for commerce? I think you already see a number of sellers really engaging with buyers there. And so I think it's already a great forum for that. This only makes it better. And we're excited to partner on this, and not only providing tools that help with the purchases coming in and the sales going out, but also how you go combat fraud and these types of things.
One question for you, Bill. Do you think that consumers will have any hesitancy about sharing their credit card number with Facebook through this kind of transaction, or will PayPal prevent that from having to happen?
Well, this is something when you use the PayPal button, broadly, when you use that PayPal button, it's helping you to go complete a purchase without having to go through the friction of adding a card. That said, there are going to be plenty of users that want to go provide a card directly, and we're helping to enable those transactions as well. So users can make those determinations of where they feel comfortable with that, but that's one of the things that we provide is the ability to go check out and not have to go type those things in, which takes friction out of the process in any event. But either way the user wants to do that, we're going to give the user that choice.
You're taking friction out of the process, but I guess to Sarah's point, in light of all of the, more recent privacy concerns around Facebook, do you think users are going to want to share and store their payment information with Instagram today?
I think you see a lot of users really wanting to go connect with sellers and with brands there already. So certainly, making it a place where users feel comfortable doing that is important, and is something that we're working together on. I think it's something that PayPal as a checkout option certainly helps with directly, but I think you see a lot of users already engaging there. So I think the question of do users want to engage in that forum, I think that's already happening. And I think this is something that makes that even better for those users and more seamless for those users.
So Sarah, we mentioned Nike, Revolve. What other retailers are kicking this off?
I think that it's just going to be a very small group for now, but what I'm most excited about is in the future, all of these people that have created their businesses on Instagram based off their followings will be able to build a marketplace there, and that's going to be like uncharted territory.
So we will be able to buy Kylie Jenner's lipstick on Instagram, is that what you're saying?
I think one day we will be, and that these businesses, Glossier today just had a more than $1 billion valuation in their latest round. These businesses that have been built up via Instagram followings will have a more direct way to sell, and maybe we'll be able to see a little bit more into how that works, how big that market is.
PayPal Chief Operating Officer Bill Reddy and Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Frier. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. You can tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.